My family and I love to travel down south to the Caribbean for vacation during the winter to get a break from the cold and lie on the beach and explore the inshore ocean. But there has been a massive increase in the coverage of sargassum along the coastline, and the accumulation is getting to the point where trucks are working around the clock to get rid of the algae. Now, just imagine going on a trip and having to hear these trucks, 24/7 or during the day, taking away from your relaxing trip. Now, climate change and increased nutrients from massive rivers are the culprit to this increase in biomass of the sargassum. And the problem is not going away anytime soon, and doesn't only affect tourists, it affects the local population that are in these areas. And sometimes we need to get things done to reduce the problem. So we're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is where you find out what's happening with the ocean, what you can do to speak up for the ocean, and how you can live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, I know the beginning of this, that little pre-intro that I do today was a little bit selfish because, it's winter and I'm thinking about traveling. I've got a trip to the Dominican Republic coming up in about a month, less than a month now. And I'm excited. I'm very excited because it's been a long winter, a late winter here in Ontario. And as spring comes closer and winter ends, you start to think about the nicer weather, nicer weather is in hotter weather, and you just want to go away and relax and try to take a break from your life of what's been going on and stuff. And it's nice to think about that. But when you think about planning a trip and you think about all the money you spend to go on a trip, you don't want anything to ruin it. Anything like, weather dependent. You don't want it to be rainy the whole time. You don't want it to be windy. You don't want to go through a massive storm. God forbid, like a hurricane hits at whatever time that you go away, or a cyclone or anything like that. You don't want anything to ruin your trip because you have a week or 2 weeks or however long you decide to take your trip, and you want it to be the best possible way. And there's only a certain amount of things that you can control, and weather is not one of them. Well, some of the other things that you can't control is what happens in the ocean while you're away. A lot of people, like an ocean as they picture it in magazines, perfectly calm, nothing in the water that will mess with their feet, some algae, some seagrass, rocks, something they can cut their foot on. People get afraid of going into the ocean because they're worried about stingrays and shuffling their feet and so forth, jellyfish, things like that you can't control. One of the things that have really increased over time in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, is the amount of sargassum that comes on the beach. And if you don't know what sargassum is, essentially it's a floating algae, and it comes from the Sargasso Sea. And it can be in different types of sort of patches and different types of lengths and densities and weight. And it's actually kind of nice, when you see it, because when you're actually seeing it floating in the ocean, it becomes a bit of a habitat for small sea turtles, fish, things like that. Provides protection and also provides food for other animals. And so it's a cool little thing that you see in the ocean. But what's not so cool is when that algae, that sargassum, becomes a bigger patch than you would first initially realize. And so you want to not see that massive, what they call a belt. And there's this great article that I found. It was on NBC News, believe it or not. And it's talking about the sargassum belt and how it's increased over time. And I first noticed it when I went to Mexico. I was in the Cancun area, and we were staying at a resort that I went away with my family. And there was about 10 of us, and it was great trip, great resort, beautiful. Like the people were great, everything. However, along the shoreline, we love to go to the beach. We go to the ocean for a reason. I'm a marine biologist. I want to go see the ocean. I want my kids to explore the ocean with me, and we have a great time. When we got to the beach, there were piles of the sargassum just along the beach. And there were the massive dump trucks and diggers that are literally all day just picking up the sargassum and putting it into the truck, and more sargassum comes into shore. Now, it used to be where, if you had a storm while you were down there, or a storm hit just before you got down there, or while you were down there, you'd get stuff that comes up. You'd get algae, probably got some pollution, some plastic pollution and so forth that would come up. And you just deal with it. They would clean it up and it would go away. And oftentimes, even before that, when I went away to Mexico a few times, they would have trucks out early in the morning so that they wouldn't disturb anybody. The site of the beach was just like what you pictured it. There was some seagrass and stuff in the water, which is perfectly natural, and it was great. But you would be able to go out and enjoy your time in the ocean. However, this wasn't the case in this situation, where you would literally step into the water even before you got into the water, and you could cover your foot. I have big feet. You can cover your foot with sargassum. It was that thick. Now, it's not heavy. It didn't bother me at the time. The problem is you can't leave it there, because it'll eventually just decay. And when it decays, it puts out this odor as it decays, as anything decays, and that can affect people's breathing. It can affect people's health over the long term. And so not only is it costly to remove, not only is it hard to view as a tourist, like tourists don't want to go in the water if that's all that's coming up along the water. I mean, if you think about it, people don't even want to go in the water when there's just regular seagrass in the water. They think it's icky on their feet, even though it's the ocean. And that's where it's supposed to be. But when this happened, you have these massive, trucks that are, cleaning this out by the tons. And it's a lot, and affecting people's health, affecting tourism dollars for people not wanting to go there. A lot of people don't realize when they go there that there's this algae, and for some it doesn't bother, for others it does. I talked to a number of people who've already gone away this year to that area, and I said, "Hey, what's the situation in the ocean like?" It's like, "Oh, we didn't go in the ocean. There's too much algae." So people aren't even going in the ocean. Now, I should mention that when I went a number of years ago, and this happened, where there was a lot of sargassum along the beach, there were areas where you could go where, like, just beyond, it was like a little shallower, it was almost like a little sandbank, where you can go and enjoy the waters, do some snorkeling, all that kind of stuff. And the sargassum wasn't there; it was protected. Like, the area was just kind of protected from the regular currents. And so you were able to enjoy swimming. So you could still swim, but a lot of people don't want to go there, especially when they see it from, as they're coming down to the beach. They're like, I'm not going to sit there. I'm not going to listen to trucks all day. That's annoying. I want calm. I want tranquility. And so they do that by going to the pool or going somewhere else. And that's a big, that's a big problem when you're looking for the long term for tourism, because this is a problem that's not going to go away. There's some people who say, scientists who say, it was quoted in here, before 2011, it was there, like the sargassum was there, but we couldn't observe it with satellites because it wasn't dense enough. But since then, it's just exploded, and now we see huge aggregations. And so in a 2019 study in the Journal of Science estimated that more than 20 million metric tons of sargassum blanketed the Atlantic in what was nicknamed the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. And then they go on to say that mass of seaweeds appears to be increasing each year, but in 2018 and 2022, we had the largest accumulations. This year is approaching those records so he added in that statement. So we're getting bigger and bigger. 2018 was big, 2022 last year was big, and we're probably seeing the same this time. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. And so when investigating the factors that could drive this dramatic growth, scientists, including, it says here, LaPointe, have found that the human activities and climate change are seeding rivers that flow into the Atlantic with nitrogen and other nutrients. And then that feeds the algae blooms. So you're having the Congo, the Amazon, the Orinoco, the Mississippi, the largest rivers on the planet, which have been affected by these things like deforestation, increasing fertilizer use, burning biomass. All of that, LaPointe says, is increasing the nitrogen concentrations in these rivers. And so we're now seeing these blooms as kind of a manifestation of the changing nutrient cycles on our planet. So if you think about what happens here, if you take the case of the Mississippi, because I know the Mississippi the most, so I can comment on that. The Mississippi is the largest river in the U.S. It goes all the way up to, I believe it's Minnesota, and then all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico through Louisiana and Mississippi. And so when it comes out to the Gulf of Mexico, in the springtime, you get a bloom of algae, right? You get a bloom of phytoplankton, and that happens just on a natural occurrence. It's springtime. Nutrients are coming in. It's feeding the sunlight, and it feeds those algae, and you just get this massive bloom. And because it's spring, you get a lot of mixing, right? You get a lot of mixing of the water, so the phytoplankton is going up and down throughout the water column and so forth throughout the day. But as summer arrives and the winds die down, but the blooms are still there, you get, and they eventually die off, the phytoplankton, because they don't have a long life cycle. They sink to the bottom, right? And when they get to the bottom, the microbial loop, so all the bacteria down there, break down the algae. They use oxygen to break it down, and it disappears, and it feeds that microbial loop, right? Beautiful cycle, nutrient cycle in the water, in the ocean. It's a natural occurrence. It's what happens. However, when nutrients increase by using a lot of fertilizers along that river, all the farmland that goes along that river through the Midwest and the South, fertilizers like from and not just agricultural land, but also from like golf courses, from residences, non-point sources, point sources, all that accumulates and it goes down and flows down the river, and it eventually comes up to the Gulf of Mexico. That bloom can extend all the way to Texas, from Mississippi all the way to Texas. That's a big span. There have been times where they measure that bloom and the causes of that bloom, where the more phytoplankton that's out there, the more it gets broken down, the less oxygen that is available in the water, because the microbial loop is using that oxygen to break down the phytoplankton. And you get what's called the dead zone, right? I've explained this a number of times on the podcast, but I thought I'd do it again because I like explaining this. Now that could span 22,000 kilometers squared. That's a big area, right? And it changes every year depending on how much nutrients are going in. In fact, that study, the hypoxic study, feeds into what are the limitations on fertilizers you can use in the Mississippi River. That's how big that study is. Those are the consequences of that study. And so we're seeing that constantly go back and forth and changing based on the hypoxic zone in the ocean, in the Gulf of Mexico at that time. And you think about that swath, you look at the Amazon, right? You look at the Congo, and you look at Orinoco. Those rivers have these massive plumes, meaning the fresh water that comes out of that with the nutrients goes out far into the ocean. It gets picked up by other places, right? It gets picked up into currents and it goes to other places. Those nutrients follow. So just imagine those nutrients come in where the sargassum patches are. That feeds into the sargassum patches. And it grows and grows and grows and grows until you have this phenomenon of the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt, right? And you can use satellites to map it. That's how big it is, right? And so even some of the people from the University of Florida who are using NASA satellite data to map the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt and where it goes, its movements, it says the bloom size in recent years would have been inconceivable a decade ago. Like they wouldn't even thought it would have actually been able to happen. And so they say historically, as far back as we have records, sargassum has been a part of the ecosystem, but the scale now is just so much bigger. And he said we would have thought what we would have thought was a major bloom 5 years ago is no longer even a blip. So we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's going to have a lot of repercussions for human health, for the economy in some of these areas, right? Because they depend on, Cancun depends on the economy, the tourism for the economy. A lot of these Caribbean islands depend on tourism for their economy. And if they're going to have these areas, they're going to have all this stuff that comes along their shores, there's not as many tourists are going to go. The tourists don't even like having seagrass in the water. A lot of hotels have been criticized and resorts have been criticized for actually dredging out those areas because, tourists don't like to put their feet in the water if there's something that's going to touch it. So imagine these massive sargassum belts. This thing has to be addressed, and it can be addressed, but people are addressing it by using like blue carbon, by looking at how to sink this carbon, how to use it as a way for carbon credits. That's a big thing. Other people are trying to figure out ways that they can, grab it and maybe make things out of it. So take it from the ocean or take it from the coastlines, put it into an area and maybe make something that, a lot of people are using kelp to use to make clothing. They're experimenting with that. So maybe we'll see that happen someday. But we're still in the early stages of that type of technology and using sargassum for that. So I would love to know what you think we could do with it and what you think the solutions are. You can hit me up on Instagram. Just DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. Or you can go to our website, speakupforblue.com. Go to the Contact Us page, fill out the form. That goes right to my email, and I'd be happy to answer you. I'd love to hear your comments on this episode and every other episode that we've done. That's it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been another episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.